The sky burned. Smoke curled into the heavens like the dying breath of a wounded beast, and the air tasted of ash and despair. Earth, once a cradle of life and hope, now lay broken beneath the iron heel of the Zelthari. Their ships, sleek and obsidian, hovered like vultures over the ruins of cities, their engines humming with a low, ominous drone. The invaders had come with promises of dominion, and they had delivered nothing but annihilation. Humanity's resistance had been fierce, but it was not enough. Not nearly enough. In the shadow of a crumbling skyscraper, Commander Elena Reyes adjusted the strap of her rifle and peered through the scope. Her face was streaked with grime, her dark hair tied back in a frayed braid. Around her, the remnants of her unit huddled in the ruins, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. They were the last soldiers, the last hope, the last flicker of defiance in a world that had all but surrendered. "Elena!" A voice rasped from behind her. It was Sergeant Marcus Cole, his once broad frame now gaunt from months of starvation and combat. He limped toward her, his left leg dragging slightly, a relic of a shrapnel wound that had never fully healed. "We can't hold this position much longer. The Zelthari are closing in." Elena lowered the rifle and turned to face him. Her eyes, a piercing green that had once been full of fire, now held only a grim determination. "We don't have a choice, Marcus. If we fall here, it's over. For all of us." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of distant explosions cut him off. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a plume of fire erupted on the horizon. The Zelthari were advancing, their war machines stomping through the ruins with mechanical precision. Elena clenched her jaw and turned back to her unit. "Listen up," she barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This is it. We hold this line or we die trying. No retreat, no surrender. For Earth." A ragged cheer rose from the soldiers, but it was tinged with exhaustion. They were tired, so tired, but they would fight until their last breath. Elena's gaze swept over them, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of their sacrifice. These were not just soldiers. They were fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. They were humanity's last stand. The battle began in earnest as the Zelthari war machines breached the perimeter. Elena's unit fought with the desperation of the doomed, their rifles barking in the smoky air. Explosions rocked the ground, and the screams of the dying mingled with the roar of alien engines. Elena moved through the chaos like a wraith, her rifle spitting death with every pull of the trigger. She was a force of nature, a storm given form, and the Zelthari fell before her. But it wasn't enough. One by one, her soldiers fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground like broken dolls. Marcus went down with a cry, a Zelthari energy bolt tearing through his chest. Elena screamed his name, but there was no time to mourn. The aliens were everywhere, their cold, unfeeling eyes scanning the battlefield for survivors. Elena fought until her rifle ran dry, until her hands were slick with blood and her body screamed for rest. She stood amidst the ruins, surrounded by the bodies of her comrades, and knew that this was the end. But she would not go quietly. She reached for the detonator on her belt, her fingers trembling as she gripped it. The Zelthari closed in, their weapons trained on her, but she smiled, a bitter, defiant smile. "For Earth," she whispered, and pressed the button. The explosion lit up the sky, a fiery beacon that could be seen for miles. Elena's body was consumed in an instant, her sacrifice a final act of defiance against the invaders. The Zelthari war machines were obliterated, their sleek forms reduced to molten slag. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Deep beneath the earth, in a facility long forgotten by humanity, something stirred. The explosion had triggered a failsafe, a signal that had lain dormant for centuries. Lights flickered to life in the darkness, and the hum of machinery filled the air. In a chamber lined with stasis pods, a figure began to move. The pod hissed as it opened, releasing a cloud of cold vapor. A man stepped out, his body tall and muscular, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He was Alpha, the first of the sleeping super soldiers, and he was awake. Alpha's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and purpose. Memories that were not his own flooded his thoughts. Images of war, of sacrifice, of a world in need of salvation. He looked around the chamber, his sharp eyes taking in the rows of stasis pods. His brothers and sisters were still asleep, but they would awaken soon. They had been created for this moment, for this war, and they would not fail. Above ground, the Zelthari were regrouping. The explosion had been a setback, but they were relentless. They would scour the earth until every last trace of humanity was erased. But they did not know about the sleeping super soldiers. They did not know that beneath their feet, a new force was rising. Alpha moved with purpose, his footsteps echoing in the empty facility. He found the armory, stocked with weapons and armor designed for his kind. He suited up, the sleek black armor fitting him like a second skin. He took a plasma rifle from the rack, its weight familiar in his hands. He was ready. As he emerged from the facility, the first thing he saw was the devastation. The sky was still dark with smoke, and the ground was littered with the wreckage of war. But Alpha did not feel despair. He felt only determination. He was a weapon, forged in the fires of humanity's desperation, and he would not rest until Earth was free. In the distance, he saw a Zelthari patrol moving through the ruins. They were scanning for survivors, their weapons at the ready. Alpha's lips curled into a grim smile. He would give them a survivor to find. The battle was swift and brutal. Alpha moved like a shadow, his plasma rifle cutting through the Zelthari with deadly precision. They barely had time to react before they were reduced to smoldering husks. Alpha stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving, his mind clear. This was his purpose. This was his war. As the last Zelthari fell, Alpha looked to the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise, its pale light filtering through the smoke. It was a new day, and with it came a new hope. The sleeping super soldiers were awake, and they would not rest until Earth was free. But the war was far from over. The Zelthari would not take this defeat lightly. They would come again with greater numbers and greater force. Alpha knew this, and he welcomed it. Let them come. He would be ready. For Earth. For humanity. For the future. The sun hung low in the sky, a pale, sickly orb struggling to pierce the veil of ash and smoke that clung to the atmosphere. Alpha stood atop the ruins of a shattered highway overpass, his armored silhouette stark against the dim light. Below him, the city sprawled in ruins, a graveyard of steel and concrete where the bones of humanity's past lay exposed. He had been awake for 3 days, and in that time, he had done what he was created to do, fight. The Zelthari patrols that had once roamed freely now lay in smoldering heaps. Their twisted remains a testament to his efficiency. But Alpha knew this was only the beginning. The Zelthari would not ignore his presence for long. Behind him, the faint hum of machinery signaled the awakening of his brethren. One by one, the stasis pods in the underground facility had opened, releasing the other super soldiers into the world. They were like him, tall, powerful, and imbued with a singular purpose. But they were also different. Each bore unique enhancements, tailored for specific roles in the war to come. There was Gamma, whose reflexes were so sharp she could dodge bullets mid-flight. Delta, whose strength could tear through Zelthari armor like paper. And Epsilon, a master tactician whose mind worked with the precision of a supercomputer. Together, they were a force unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Alpha turned as Gamma approached, her lithe form moving with the grace of a predator. Her armor was lighter than his, designed for speed rather than brute force, and her eyes glowed a faint blue in the dim light. "The facility is secure," she reported, her voice cool and measured. "The others are ready. What's our next move?" Alpha's gaze swept over the ruined city. "We reclaim Earth," he said simply. "Piece by piece if we have to. But we start here. This city was once a symbol of humanity's strength. We'll make it one again." Gamma nodded, her expression unreadable. Like all of them, she had been programmed with a deep understanding of human history and culture, but she had no personal connection to it. The super soldiers were weapons, nothing more. And yet, as Alpha looked at her, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more stirring within her, something that went beyond their programming. The first target was a Zelthari outpost located in the heart of the city. Intelligence gathered from the fallen patrols had revealed its location, and Alpha had spent hours poring over the data with Epsilon. The outpost was heavily fortified, with energy shields and automated turrets guarding its perimeter. But it was also a hub of activity, a place where the Zelthari stored supplies and coordinated their operations. Taking it down would be a significant blow to their efforts. The super soldiers moved through the ruins like ghosts, their footsteps silent on the cracked pavement. Alpha led the way, his plasma rifle at the ready, while Gamma scouted ahead, her enhanced senses alert for any signs of danger. Delta brought up the rear, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the fading light. Epsilon stayed close to Alpha, his sharp eyes scanning the environment for any tactical advantages. They reached the outpost just as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the city into darkness. The Zelthari had erected a series of energy barriers around the perimeter, their faint blue glow illuminating the surrounding area. Automated turrets swiveled lazily, their sensors scanning for threats. Alpha signaled for the others to halt, and they crouched behind the remains of a collapsed building, their eyes fixed on the outpost. "Gamma," Alpha whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the energy barriers. "Take out the turrets." Quietly, Gamma nodded and slipped away, her form blending seamlessly with the shadows. Moments later, the turrets began to spark and fizzle, their barrels drooping as Gamma's precise strikes disabled their power sources. Alpha gave the signal, and the super soldiers advanced, their movements synchronized and deliberate. The first barrier fell to Delta's brute strength, his armored fists smashing through the energy field with a burst of sparks. The Zelthari inside the outpost reacted immediately, their shrill alarms echoing through the night. Alpha and the others moved in, their weapons blazing. The Zelthari soldiers were no match for the super soldiers' speed and precision, and the outpost quickly descended into chaos. Alpha fought with a cold efficiency, his plasma rifle cutting through the enemy like a scythe. He moved from one target to the next, his mind focused solely on the mission. But as he fought, he couldn't help but notice the way Gamma hesitated before taking a shot, or the way Delta's fists trembled slightly after each blow. They were feeling something that went beyond their programming, and it unsettled him. The battle was over in minutes. The outpost lay in ruins, its energy barriers flickering weakly before collapsing entirely. The super soldiers regrouped in the center of the compound, their armor scorched and dented but otherwise unscathed. Alpha surveyed the scene, his mind already calculating their next move. But before he could speak, Gamma stepped forward, her expression troubled. "Alpha," she said, her voice hesitant. "Did you feel it? During the fight?" Alpha frowned. "Feel what?" Gamma hesitated, as if unsure how to put it into words. "Something different, like there was more at stake than just the mission. Like we were fighting for something personal." Alpha stared at her, his mind racing. He had felt it too, a flicker of emotion that had no place in a weapon. But he couldn't afford to acknowledge it, not now. "We're soldiers," he said firmly. "Our purpose is clear. Anything else is a distraction." Gamma looked as though she wanted to argue, but she nodded reluctantly. Alpha turned to the others, his voice sharp and commanding. "We move out. There's still work to be done." As they left the outpost behind, Alpha couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The super soldiers were awakening to more than just their purpose. They were awakening to themselves, and that, he realized, could be both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. The night wore on, and the super soldiers continued their campaign, striking at Zelthari positions with relentless precision. Each victory brought them closer to their goal, but it also deepened the unease that had taken root in Alpha's mind. He could see it in the others as well, the way Delta's blows grew more ferocious, the way Epsilon's strategies became more daring. They were evolving, and he didn't know if he could control it. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the super soldiers had reclaimed a significant portion of the city. The Zelthari were in retreat, their forces scattered and disorganized. But Alpha knew this was only the beginning. The Zelthari would regroup, and they would come back stronger. And when they did, the super soldiers would be ready. As they stood atop a crumbling skyscraper, watching the sun rise over the ruins, Alpha felt a strange sense of hope. They were weapons, yes, but they were also something more. They were the last hope of a dying world, and they would not fail. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had only just begun. The Zelthari command ship loomed in orbit like a malevolent star, its sleek, obsidian hull bristling with weapons and sensors. It was the heart of their invasion force, a symbol of their dominance over Earth and countless other worlds. Alpha stood in the ruins of what had once been a communications tower, his eyes fixed on the distant speck of light that marked the ship's position. The super soldiers had pushed the Zelthari back, reclaiming swathes of the planet, but the war was far from over. The command ship was the key. Destroy it and the invasion would collapse. Fail and Earth would be lost forever. Behind him, the other super soldiers waited in tense silence. Gamma's fingers twitched restlessly on the hilt of her energy blade, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for threats. Delta's massive frame was a shadow against the dim light, his fists clenched in anticipation. Epsilon stood apart, his mind already racing through strategies and calculations. They were ready, but Alpha could feel the tension in the air. This mission would be their greatest challenge yet. "The Zelthari know we're coming," Alpha said, his voice low and steady. "They'll be expecting us. But they don't know what we're capable of. We hit them hard and we hit them fast. No hesitation." Gamma nodded, her expression grim. "And if we don't make it back?" Alpha met her gaze, his glowing eyes unwavering. "Then we die knowing we gave everything for Earth." The plan was simple in concept but nearly impossible in execution. Using a captured Zelthari shuttle, the super soldiers would infiltrate the command ship and plant a series of explosive charges at its core. The charges, designed by Epsilon, would trigger a chain reaction capable of destroying the ship from within. But getting to the core would require them to fight their way through hundreds of Zelthari soldiers and bypass layers of security. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only way. The shuttle ride was tense, the air thick with unspoken fears and doubts. Alpha sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls as he guided the craft through the atmosphere. The others sat in silence, their minds focused on the task ahead. As they approached the command ship, a voice crackled over the comms, harsh and guttural. It was Zelthari, demanding identification. Alpha responded in their language, his voice calm and authoritative. The ruse worked, and the shuttle was granted access to the ship's docking bay. As the doors slid shut behind them, Alpha turned to the others. "This is it. Stay sharp." The docking bay was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the ship's engines. The super soldiers moved quickly, their footsteps silent on the metal floor. They encountered their first resistance almost immediately, a squad of Zelthari soldiers patrolling the area. The fight was brief and brutal. Gamma's blade flashed in the dim light, cutting through armor and flesh with ease. Delta's fists crushed skulls and shattered bones. Alpha's plasma rifle picked off stragglers with deadly precision. Within moments, the squad was wiped out. But the alarm had been raised. Klaxons blared, and the ship's corridors filled with the sound of running footsteps. The super soldiers pressed on, their movements swift and coordinated. Epsilon led the way, his tactical mind guiding them through the labyrinthine ship. They fought through wave after wave of Zelthari, their progress slowed but never halted. The charges were planted one by one, each one bringing them closer to their goal. As they neared the ship's core, the resistance grew fiercer. The Zelthari deployed their elite forces, biomechanical warriors encased in impenetrable armor. The super soldiers were pushed to their limits, their bodies battered and bruised. Gamma took a hit to the shoulder, her armor cracking under the force of the blow. Delta's leg was grazed by an energy blast, leaving a smoldering wound. Even Alpha, usually untouchable, was forced to retreat under the relentless assault. But they pressed on, driven by a determination that went beyond their programming. They were fighting for more than just a mission, they were fighting for Earth, for humanity, for the future. And that gave them strength. Finally, they reached the core. It was a massive chamber, filled with swirling energy and humming machinery. The heart of the ship. Alpha set the final charge, his hands moving with practiced precision. As he worked, he felt a strange sense of calm. This was it, the end of the road. But as he turned to leave, a voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking. "You think you've won, little soldiers?" Alpha froze. The voice was coming from a figure standing in the shadows. A Zelthari commander, taller and more imposing than any they had encountered before. His armor was adorned with intricate patterns, and his eyes glowed with a malevolent light. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "You've caused us quite a bit of trouble," the commander said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But it ends here." Alpha raised his rifle, but the commander moved faster than he could react. A blast of energy struck him in the chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. The others rushed to his aid, but the commander was already upon them. Gamma's blade clashed against his energy shield, the force of the impact sending her flying. Delta charged, but the commander sidestepped and delivered a crushing blow to his side. Epsilon tried to flank him, but the commander's reflexes were too quick. Alpha struggled to his feet, his vision swimming. He could see the charges, their timers counting down. They had minutes left. He had to end this. Summoning every ounce of strength, he charged at the commander, his plasma rifle blazing. The two clashed in a flurry of blows, their movements a blur of speed and power. Alpha fought with everything he had, but the commander was relentless. A final, devastating strike sent Alpha crashing to the ground, his armor cracked and broken. The commander loomed over him, his eyes cold and pitiless. "You fought well, little soldier, but you were never going to win." Alpha smiled through the pain. "Maybe not, but we don't have to." The commander's eyes widened as he realized the truth. The charges, they were about to detonate. Alpha's hand shot out, gripping the commander's leg. "For Earth," he whispered. The explosion tore through the core, a blinding light that consumed everything in its path. The super soldiers, the commander, the ship itself, all were swallowed by the fire. And then silence. On the surface of Earth, the sky lit up as the command ship disintegrated, its fragments burning up in the atmosphere. The Zelthari forces, now leaderless and disorganized, began to retreat. The war was over. In the ruins of the city, a group of human survivors watched the sky, their faces filled with awe and hope. They didn't know the names of the soldiers who had saved them, but they would never forget their sacrifice. And deep in the void of space, where the command ship had once loomed, there was only silence. But in that silence there was hope, a new dawn for Earth, a future worth fighting for.